Uh-oh, we're being recorded. I better straighten up. The second season here, the fall, when everybody falls back into their regular schedules.
Yeah, I'm gonna mute.
I know where Carrie's at. She's right beside. So as people settle back into their schedules, all the kids are at school and vacations are over. Things tend to happen. Are we seeing some more listings hitting the market now? What's everybody got happening? Anybody? You can unmute if you like. All right, I'll just pretend that there's a ton of new listings and we are all going to have a bang up September here. I think the newest face out there, Stacy. How you doing, Stacy?
Good. How are you?
Good. Welcome
Good.
aboard. We're so
Thank you.
glad to have you. Oh, there's Matt Grimm. Good to see you, the Grimm Realtor. Okay, so I'm going to do a screen share here, show you what's going on. I emailed a bunch of documents out, or Terry emailed a bunch of documents out to you so you kind of knew what was going on. There's an agenda, should be in that packet showing you kind of what we're going to be talking about. So one of the things that one of my top 10 questions, or all of my top 10 questions practically, kind of come out of sellers property disclosure and home inspections. Does everybody have a pretty good handle on what they're doing? Tell me, what's your level of confidence in sellers property disclosures? This can be interactive.
I've done one so far on the selling side.
All right. So this is the one part of our agreement that is not up to us. It's not up to PAR. This is state of Pennsylvania law. And you can see there on the screen share, this is the residential real estate transfers law, the real estate seller disclosure law. This is the real deal. This is required by the state of Pennsylvania, not just our professional trade group, the Association of Realtors, not by the Real Estate Commission, but by the Pennsylvania legislature. So we don't have any leeway in this. It needs to be done. And as we scroll down through here, I just thought this would be a good desk reference for all of you to have. You can save a copy of this just to check stuff out. If you've never looked at a law, this is what they look like. They're going to give you, even municipal codes kind of look like this. They give you what I call chapter and verse. They're going to talk to you about the general provisions and, the specifics. And then they're going to drill down into the table of contents and tell you about each of the different things that are happening. I'm going to scroll ahead to the into the more boring parts of it. There's going to be definitions here that describe to you the roles that are played. We should be all pretty familiar. They're not hiding the ball here. They just want everyone to be working off the same script as to who, what, where, why, and when. We're going to go ahead here a little bit to section 7303, and it talks about the disclosure of material defects. And it says, any seller who intends to transfer any interest in real property shall disclose to the buyer any material defects with the property known to the seller by completing all applicable items in a property disclosure statement, which satisfies the requirements of the section. A signed and dated copy of the property disclosure statement shall be delivered to the buyer in accordance with this section. All right. That's what takes it out of our hands, out of good practice or best practices into what is required by law. So pop quiz, does this apply to just properties that are being sold in the MLS? No, I gave that away in my agenda. This is not just for MLS sales. This is for sale by owners. This is for properties that are being sold by wholesalers, properties that are being sold by, everything on market, off market, no matter who, you are obliged to fill out one of these disclosures. Okay. I'm going to build on this. We're going to build up excitement. This is going to be really awesome. You're going to love this. Getting into section 7304, it says, nothing in this chapter shall preclude a seller from using a form of property disclosure statement that contains additional provisions that require greater specificity or that call for the disclosure of the condition or existence of other features of this property. What this alludes to is we need, by law, to satisfy the Pennsylvania state seller's property disclosure law, these 16 elements. All right. We need when it was occupied, the roof, basements, crawl spaces, termites, structural problems, additions, water and sewage systems, plumbing systems, etc. We need these 16 items to satisfy the requirements of the state property disclosure law. Has anyone seen a PAR seller property disclosure? You better answer yes. Do these property disclosures that we typically use satisfy these 16 elements? Maybe more. How about absolutely more? We have a dump truck of different items on the seller's property disclosure. I'm looking at one right now. I included one for your reference. There's 11 pages and 22 sections of disclosures. Section 23 on the disclosure is just for attachments, but the first 22 sections include all kinds of stuff. That's far more than the 16 available here. If somebody, so what PAR supplies us for use is far more than these 16 basic elements. If we want to use a more simplified disclosure, or a seller wants to use one, they are more than welcome to. However, for best practices, and so that we don't get pushback and so that we can limit our liability, PAR likes to see this more complete version, because just because something isn't asked for doesn't mean it shouldn't be disclosed. What we're trying to do is get in front of things that could wind us up in court by asking questions that might reasonably piss off a buyer whenever they get into a house and didn't think to ask of it. So that's what we have here. So it says, seller is not obligated by this chapter to make any specific investigations or inquiry in an effort to complete the property disclosure. But in completing the property disclosure statement, the seller shall make any representations that the seller or the agent for the seller knows or has reason to know are false. So that's us or our agent. So we have to disclose things that we know about. And if we find out that after our initial disclosure, something is inaccurate, we have an obligation according to the seller's property disclosure law to notify the buyer of that inaccuracy. And as we know, buyers may become picky after they spend a lot of money on a house. So we may hang on a second. We've got some feedback. We got some feedback here. Can you mute your computer?
It is.
It is. It is.
Mute on your Zoom, please. There we go. Check, check. Okay, that's good. So if we find any errors, we need to let that be known, lest that get back on us or our sellers. So, what are some of the most common questions we have about disclosure, or more specifically, non-disclosure? I want to open this up to everybody. Unmute yourself and answer, raise your hand, whatever. What are some of the most common questions we have about disclosures? Let me paint a picture. What if we have a buyer and something should come up after closing that they feel wasn't disclosed or wasn't disclosed properly? What's one of our most common questions that we field from them or we have to take into consideration? What's the statute of limitations? Anybody ever been asked that question? I know I've had to answer that question for plenty of agents over the years. An action for damages as a result of a violation of this chapter must be commenced within 2 years after the date of final settlement. You're going to find that on the bottom of page 5. That's section 7311, failure to comply. Want to draw your attention to some other section here. And that's section 7313. And that's the responsibility of the licensee. We have the responsibility to provide this form under section C to our client. An agent representing a seller must advise a seller of the seller's responsibilities under this chapter and must provide the seller with a copy of the form of property disclosure statement. Okay. Who does this exclude? Who do we need to provide these forms to?
Anything residential, less than, I think it's 4 units.
Anything residential? Good, good, good. What is residential? Can you expand on that just a skosh?
Anything, units, no less than 4 units, less than 4 units.
Yep, 1 to 4 units. Why 1 to 4?
Because it could be, I gotcha. Because it could be what, 2 or 3?
Unimproved land doesn't require disclosure. So here's our 10 exceptions of who doesn't need to fill out a property disclosure. Transfers by a fiduciary during the administration of a decedent estate, guardianship or conservatorship or trust. What does that even mean? What is a fiduciary during the administration of a decedent estate? That's an estate. So that would be the executor or administrator. We can get into, the difference between administrators and executors some other time, but guardianship. So somebody who's in charge of somebody who's been deemed potentially incompetent by the state. A conservatorship is, I think, somewhat similar. Somebody who has to take care of another person or property, or a trust. Transfers as the result of a court order. That would be something like sheriff's sale. Transfers to a mortgage lender that result from a buyer's default. That's a foreclosure. Transfers from one co-owner to another co-owner. So, that would be LLC from one partner to another. Two folks own a rental and one of them sells it to the other. That, the assumption is that everybody knows what they're dealing with and they don't have to fill that out. Transfers made from a spouse, made to a spouse or a direct descendant. So, that would be in the case of, selling a property, in a case of a divorce or from parent to child. Transfers between, oh, there it is. Transfers between spouses as a result of divorce, separation, or property settlement. Transfers by a corporation, partnership, or other association. Transfers of a property to be demolished or converted to non-residential use. That would be pretty self-explanatory there. Or explanatory. Transfers of unimproved real property. Unimproved real property being naked land. That's not doing anything. And transfers of new construction that have never been occupied, and the buyer has received a 1-year home warranty covering the construction. And the building has been inspected for compliance with applicable building code. And a certificate of occupancy or code of compliance has been issued for the dwelling. So all three have to pertain in section 10 there. I'm going to scroll back up. That's not me, everybody. There's a dog in the room.
Justin, I have a question.
Yeah, lay it on me.
The executor box, now, is it best practice to have them? I mean, they can't fill it out, let's assume, because they've never lived there, but they're the executor or administrator. Is it best practice to have them sign it and upload it, or do they have to?
I say it is best practice to sign that executor administrator box. And let me get back to why that makes sense right here in a position article that comes out from PAR. If you guys ever want to do any of your own research, I don't know why you would, but it's a good practice. One of the places I go for all my information is PAR. And PAR gives me all the documents, not just the documents, but the guidelines for preparation and use of each of those documents. So most of the stuff that I included in my email out to each of you was a combination of articles that came from PAR attorneys. So we're going to go ahead and count that as gospel. There's the documents that we use in our everyday practice, plus the guidelines for preparation and use of those documents. So in this article of about a year ago, we ask who's exempt. Well, there's no exemption for sellers who use the property as a rental. If you own it as a rental, still got to fill it out, even if you didn't live there. The assumption being you're taking responsibility for your property, you're fixing it, you owned it. You should know what's going on there, right? Number two, there's no exception for sellers who are flipping a property. I would say that somebody who's flipping a property probably has more knowledge about it than your average homeowner, because they're in there tearing out walls and wires and pipes and, whatever, and putting it back together. So they, it's really kind of a BS proposition for a flipper to say, I didn't know, because they're in there making it ready. There's no exception for a mixed use property. So storefront on the first floor, hair salon, whatever. Second floor is residential unit. Even if they're running a business out of there, there's still a residential element to it. So it's still going to require a disclosure under the eyes of the state. And then there's no exclusion for somebody who's selling with a power of attorney. If the property owner is available and competent, they will likely have to fill out the form. All right. Now, the reason I included this was specifically that there's two legitimate scenarios that often come up. And I wanted you to have this for reading. The first is estates. Seller disclosure law states that the executor or administrator of an estate does not have to fill out the seller disclosure form. That said, though, as they go on here, there's still a duty to disclose outside the seller's disclosure law. Pennsylvania courts routinely held that the sellers must disclose known material defects. That extends to agents. If we walk in and there's a basement full of water and mold and whatever, we see that, and we're supposed to disclose that. For example, it says, let's say the executor of his estate is aware that the home gets water in the basement. Even though we're not required to fill out a full seller's disclosure form, we still may have to disclose that material defect. So to answer your question completely through the lens of this article, sign that block up front, letting everyone know that you're dealing with an executor or administrator, but go ahead and have them fill out the pertinent parts of the document that they know, because that's what's required. Now, if they have an attorney who's, advising them not to do it, get that in writing, cover your back as much as possible. So I've had attorneys say, you don't have to fill this out, don't fill it out. That may be realistic if you have a property that's being sold here in the mid-state, but the executor never lived there. Mom and dad bought it after they went to college in Colorado and they never came home. Okay, we may not know a thing about that property. That's all right. That's legit. But, if my parents passed away and I had to sell their house, I know plenty about it, and I would have to disclose it. And I think that that's a case with most of the estates that we deal with.
Justin,
Yes,
so if they still have to sign it though, but they don't have to fill it out, is that correct? You should still have them sign it?
they have to sign it on the front and they have to disclose anything they know. I would advise they don't sign as the seller.
Yeah,
Sign on the front, fill out any material defects that they know about. Like, oh, mom always said that the basement filled up with water when it rained. Well, that's something we should disclose, because that could get back to them. And what we're trying to do here for the purpose of this disclosure is limit your seller's liability. Yes, it may make a sale a little bit more difficult on the run up to get it under contract, but the last thing we want to do is sell a property and have to go back and deal with a client going to court because they didn't disclose something.
Okay, so now I'm the buyer's agent
Yep.
and it's an estate and there's no disclosure and the
Yep.
response is, let's assume they never lived at the house, went to Colorado, whatever. Am I still asking the agent and being pretty adamant? Again, well, I need, do we need something signed? Whether what they know, what they don't know, whatever the scenario is.
I don't know that I would,
Do we have to have that as a buyer agent for our files? I guess.
It's not a full-scale inquisition to get that information, I don't think. I think what we're doing is saying, hey, do we have at least the disclosure signed?
Mhm.
With the executor block, we'd really like to see that. If they refuse to do it, hey, we've done the best we can.
Gotcha.
In this case, it's not the buyer's agent who's at fault. It's the seller's agent and the seller who are at fault. Okay. So if you've made a straight-faced effort to get this documentation and they're not going to provide it, there's really nothing we can do about it.
Okay. Good enough. Thank you.
One of
Would
my,
it be wise to try to get something in writing from them regarding not providing it?
I'd shoot them an email. That counts.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Second common scenario is when the seller is aware of something about a property that isn't technically considered to be a material defect. Hauntings, murder, suicide.
That actually happened to me one time.
I've had several suicide houses, and it's, you know, as it states in this article, Pennsylvania courts are clear that these sorts of non-physical and subjective issues are not subject to disclosure law, but they are still a stigma, right? And it still might bug out a buyer if they find out that there was a multiple homicide in the property that they just bought to be their dream home, right? That's save yourself some trouble and just go ahead and try and encourage the seller to disclose that. Because I think that it's reasonable to assume that I mean, there's a whole scale of people out there, from people who would think it's kind of cool to people that would be totally bugged out and never spend a night in that house if they found out at the closing table, right? Do you think, do we think that there's a possibility that there might be a lawsuit? Yeah, it's possible. People can sue over anything, whether they're right or not. We still have to defend against it. So if you ever get into that situation, give me a call. We'll kind of feel our way through it. But I've had several suicide houses, and it's not a secret, it's kind of notorious. And the neighbors, whenever they bring over that first batch of brownies, are going to say, wow, it's kind of weird. I never thought that somebody would be living in the suicide house. So it's not going to be a secret for long. Any questions? Thank you guys for the interaction. Got some good stuff so far. Home inspections. What do they cover? Well, what do we have the ability to inspect for? What do we have the ability to inspect for, everybody? Anyone seen a seller's, agreement of sale?
Do you want
Are you
specifics
different?
or?
Home inspection, septic, WDI, all that stuff?
Yep, all that stuff, all that
All that
stuff,
stuff.
right? Your due diligence menu that's on the agreement of sale. Those are the items that fall under the protection of the home inspection law and the home inspection contingencies, right? So those are the things that we're trying to, we do a home inspection to verify all the stuff that was disclosed on the seller's property disclosure or not. The caveat I always throw out there to buyers is these are the things that the seller, if they're honest, know about. Best case scenario. Maybe they don't know all this stuff, but maybe they do, and maybe they're hiding it. And that's why we do a seller's property disclosure, for independent verification, or to build off the stuff that's being disclosed. Because sometimes a disclosed item is the tip of the iceberg. And whenever we get into a home inspection, they can really kind of blow that up and find out. Now, how's everybody do their seller property or their home inspection? Does everybody go on the home inspection and spend the whole 4 hours there? Do you pack a lunch?
I used to.
Yeah.
No. So we've got from used to, yes, no. I used to first few times. What I typically do, and let me tell you my preference and why I don't. A lot of stuff happens on a home inspection. There's lots of words. There's lots of things. Maybe I stepped out to be on the phone and the home inspector said, oh boy, that looks kind of rough, but it never made it into the report. Now the buyer locked on to those 4 words or 5 words. Ooh, that looks kind of rough. And says, well, you didn't advise me on how to make a reply to inspection on that. First of all, it didn't make it in the report. Second of all, I wasn't in the room. Now you've got to defend yourself that you missed something or you didn't advise them on that. My perspective is that home inspection is between them and their inspector. Let them work it out. Let them figure out what is important to them. I'm a gambler. I'll roll the dice, right? I don't care. I bought my first house I bought, I got a home inspection. 2 weeks later, I'm out there with a chainsaw, cutting off the back wall and throwing it into the yard because of the termite damage. All right, so that was missed by a home inspector. Next house, I was like, I don't need a home inspection, and the furnace and the central air goes out the day I move in. So would that change how I did either of those situations? Probably not, but I'm at peace with risk. You know, I get it. You know, I know that houses break and things happen, but I have no idea what the risk tolerance is for any particular buyer that I may represent. They may put up a bold front and say, oh yeah, I'm pretty handy, I can fix anything. But when it comes down to it, they may be the ones who absolutely freak out at a broken light switch. Right? So I'm not going to tell them what's important. I need them to tell me what's important. Now, if they give me a report from the home inspector that I have no input on, and they ask me questions about a particular situation, I'm happy to weigh in on that. But I don't want to be the one telling them how they should live their life or what is important to them. They should be the one telling me what's important. Everybody follow that line of thought? Okay. So those home inspections. Some people might do no inspections. Some people might want to do every single contingency in there, right? From what's the most off the wall home inspection topic that any of you has ever had to line up for a client? Mold is probably the most rare. Actually not. Lead-based paint. I've done a couple lead-based paint. But they were outside the home. Yep. Yep. Has anyone done radon testing in water? If you practice in Maryland, you may have done radium. Radium is waterborne radon. And that may be more common down in Maryland, I've heard. Has anyone done electromagnetic field testing? I mean, it's in the agreement of sale. I've never done it, but it's there. So I would like to see that one too. So those are all the things that we can do, and that's what we can cover. Now, what happens if a home inspector misses something? Has it ever happened? Has anyone ever had that experience? I have. And you know, a home inspection, all these home inspections, they disclaim the heck out of it right up front that this is, you know, straight out of the seller's property disclosure law, that this is a non-invasive, you know, survey of the property. They're basically an extra set of trained eyes. You know, a pretty good contractor or somebody who's a really picky or well-experienced handy person is probably going to be able to tell just about as much about a property as a seller's or as a property inspector. But these home inspectors are actually licensed to do this. They are licensed through a non-profit, and they don't have a dog in this hunt. Whether the property is perfect or basically condemned, it makes no difference to that home inspector what they find, and that's who you want. Okay. Now, what's the limit of liability on a home inspector? Every one of them is going to make your client sign a contract before they get to the property, limiting their liability probably to 1, 2, or 3 times the cost of the inspection. So they really, it's not an insurance policy. This is just a extra handy friend that you paid to come along, kind of like a personal trainer at the gym, right? If you sprain your ankle, you're still on your own. And that's what a home inspector is all about. So, if they miss something, you can go back after them, but I don't think you're going to get very far. And that's the truth of the matter.
Justin, when you say they missed something, I mean, I certainly had situations where it was working at the time of inspection and then something breaks a week after they move in. That's not missing something because it was working, like a hot water heater or whatever. So what would be an example of I missed something?
I sold a property, I don't know, 10 or a dozen years ago, and the home inspector didn't highlight that the service line coming into the house was frayed. You know what I'm talking about? The big electrical cable coming from the pole to the meter.
Yes.
Anyone ever seen those when they're kind of ratty and frayed? Yeah, who cares, you know? Well, what happened was water ran down that service line, found the crease where it was frayed, and entered that like a funnel. So my client called me around 11 o'clock one night and says, man, please come over here. I don't even know what to do. And I walk into his basement and there's water shooting like 3 feet out of his electrical panel. The water was running in a thunderstorm from the pole down, picking up speed, coming down the service line and shooting like a fountain out of the electric panel. That I would classify as, oops, missed that, right? He missed that. Not the end of the world, but we've had items where there's been structural items where a home inspector said, ooh, no big deal, wound up being a big deal. You know, usually these guys are pretty good at saying, further evaluate or whatever. So it's not that they miss something. It's just they're not a professional in every trade. So they're not going to be able to call every item out. But I don't want to get, you know, too far into the weeds on all of the things that can possibly happen. I just want to point out, you know, some things that we can dig deeper into. So the way I usually do a home inspection, I'll show up, having had a conversation previously with the buyer about the seller's property disclosure or any items that we saw on our first tour of the house or first 2 tours of the house before we wrote the offer. Before we go to the home inspection, I'll give them a call and say, here's a couple of things that I thought I would point out to the home inspector. It would be, you know, this crack in the foundation, this frayed service line, this rotten wood at the brick molding at the basement entrance. Is there anything else that seems to be a concern to you? I'll introduce the home inspector to the client, make sure that they get off on the good foot, make sure that we have any areas of particular concern pointed out to that home inspector before we get started. Say, thanks very much. You're in good hands. Call me when you're done. We'll be getting the report tonight. After we get the report, we'll go over everything and formulate our reply to inspection. Does anybody do it any differently or have anything to add on that? Great. I love it. You guys are agreeing with me. All right. All right. So the seller's property disclosure is 11 pages. Did anyone peek and see how long the guidelines to preparation and use for that are? 15 pages telling you how to use an 11-page document. That's pretty good. So there's plenty of notes here. A couple things I want to highlight on there. Broker agent responsibilities. With responsibility for the completion of a seller's property disclosure statement on the seller, rather than the seller's agent, many practitioners may believe that they have no responsibilities under the law, and that is incorrect. For example, the seller's property disclosure law states that an agent representing a seller must advise the seller of the seller's responsibilities under this chapter. How can we punt all liability on seller's property disclosure for the most part? Product that I have had some experience with here lately and I like is Seller's Shield. My cousin used this for the first time just the other week. Property built in 1949. We priced it great. We had multiple offers. Buyer came and bought the property as is, no inspections. That includes the seller's that includes the septic system that's been in the ground since 1948 or 49. Disclosure or not, something goes sideways, there could be repercussions. Seller's Shield provides coverage, and I've included a flyer for your fun. $20,000 of paid legal representation by expert real estate attorneys for claims made within 1, 2, or 3 years of sale. And you can opt in for as low as $200. So for $200 up to for the Cadillac protection, I think it's $417 after tax. Your seller can be protected for defects that they didn't know about. So that's a good way. And the nice thing about Seller's Shield, the program, whether or not they opt into the additional insurance policy, is it doesn't let them skip stuff, right? It makes sure that they complete that seller's property disclosure in a clean, legible format. So
I have a question for you, Justin. Could
Okey-doke.
you tell me the differences between that and what America's Preferred Home Warranty offers?
sure, a home warranty fixes the broken stuff.
Right, but don't they offer like legal, they offer, I think it's like for 2 years, they offer a certain amount in legal fees for the seller?
America's Preferred, I have not seen that, but I will look into it further.
Cool, thanks.
Thank you. I'm making a note. That's kind of a belt and suspender situation. If your seller has put a home warranty on a property, they have Seller's Shield. I mean, they've got all kinds of interlocking liability protection there. One of the nice things about either using a home warranty or Seller's Shield is it decreases your errors and omissions deductible if we all get sued. So I like things that save us money if we get sued. So that's a good one. Thank you, Margaret. I'll look into that one a little bit closer. Now, advice that we can give to our seller. Unknown and not applicable are okay answers when they're filling out this property disclosure. Right? If they don't know, that's legit. If it's not applicable, also legit. They don't have to make stuff up. But one of the things that we always need to remember is sometimes quiz your client if it seems too good to be true. I had a property that I sold, first deal I ever did with my partner, Christy Knox. I had the listing. And I asked them if they had any issues with their septic while they were filling it out. They said no. A little while later, goes under contract. The buyer runs a camera down the sewer line because it was flushing a little slow. They found out that there was this giant oak tree growing out of the distribution box in the septic system. I mean, like 3 feet around. It must have started growing the day they finished the house. And I quizzed the sellers after that, and I said, I thought you said that you didn't have any problems with the septic. The distribution box is shattered. And they said, well, you can't do laundry and take a shower at the same time. Otherwise, it backs up into the laundry room. So for sellers, it's all about perspective. That's what they were used to. It wasn't an issue for them. But people who were, moving from a place that didn't have septic or a house that didn't have an oak tree in the distribution box, that was a huge issue. So sometimes it's a matter of perspective, and we have to kind of push it if we're dealing with people who might not, these things might not occur to them. So whether we filled out our seller property disclosure or we've assisted our client through their home inspection, there comes a time when we're going to be dealing with the inspection contingency. And the one article that I've included for your reading, let me share it so you can see it here. This is a great one-page review of the seller property contingency. When I get there. Bear with me. Sorry, guys. It's worth noting that the functioning of the inspection contingency has changed over the years. We hear a lot of times from folks who say, that's not how I understood it, or that's not how it was when I started. And that's the truth, but that's no excuse, right? The seller's property disclosure has, or the inspection contingency has changed. So what are the 3 operative timeframes that we need to know about? One is the, and they're all spelled out very cleanly right here. There's the contingency period, which is 10 days. There's the negotiation period, which is 5 days. And then there's the last period, which they don't call the termination period, but I do. The termination period is 2 days. So it's 10, 5, and 2. Contingency, negotiation, and termination. Now, which of those periods may a buyer terminate the deal? The buyer may terminate only during the contingency period or the termination period. We may not terminate during the 5-day negotiation period, according to PAR. You are negotiating. And the intent of that is to negotiate for that full 5-day period or wait until the 2-day period to call it quits. But the buyer's not supposed to be pulling the plug during that 5-day period.
But what does it matter if they submit their termination or not, and then we wait the last 2 days?
This is kind of a gray area. And the question for those at home, if you couldn't hear Shelby's question, was what happens if the buyer terminates on day 3 of that negotiation period? So what? We've just done it ahead of schedule. And I agree, but it's kind of a gray area. And somebody who is a stickler / pain in the butt might say, your buyer is in default of the agreement of sale for improper termination. They did not have the right to terminate during that 5-day period. So to protect yourself and your client's earnest money deposit, I would urge you strongly to not terminate during that 5-day period, just because it makes more headaches for you, me, and your buyer. Does everybody follow what I'm saying? If you get in there and you do your home inspection on day 3 and day 4, your buyer's like, this place is, it's just junk. I'm out. Can you terminate on day 5? Absolutely. Can you terminate on day 9? Yep. Can you terminate on day 10? No problem. Can you terminate on day 11? I would press pause and wait for your 2-day period after that 5-day negotiation period. And that is straight from the words of Desiree Brocker, because it says the buyer cannot immediately terminate the contract upon receiving that response. The text of section 13B3A explicitly states that the parties are to use that time to negotiate, but it does not give the buyer any additional right to terminate during that time period. And that's what we have right here. So follow that up with another question. At what period during the home inspection contingency, that's days 1 through 10, 5, or 2, does the seller have the right to terminate this agreement? Are you guys ignoring me? Or are you just on to my trick question? The seller never has the right to terminate. Right. Seller may not terminate.
It's not something that they should have done legally themselves.
Exactly. What happens if the seller? No, thank you for talking. What happens if the seller does not reply to the buyer's response?
By the sunset as in, or they terminate,
Right,
or then they can terminate this last.
exactly. If the buyer does not receive a response from the seller, either they have to terminate or they bought the ticket and they have to ride the ride. So it's up to the buyer to terminate if they don't receive a response from the seller. Everybody on? Yep, it's right there. But as I always say, if you want to make sure that something is ignored in the agreement, make it in all capitals or bold print, and it will be overlooked every time. So that's a brief review, and I think a sufficient review of the contingency. Now let's get on to the documents that we're going to be dealing with once we've dealt with a seller's property disclosure, a home inspection. We're getting through all this. Does anyone remember a time before the BRI, before the buyer's reply to inspection? This contract or this document only came out in 16, so we've been using it for several years now. Why doesn't it have an opportunity for the seller to sign on that? The reason it doesn't have a place for the seller to sign on this is it's not a contract. It's just a consumer. It's not an addendum. This is just a communication tool. This is just a way for the buyer to notify the seller of what they're thinking, and to throw out there free of consequence an idea of what we might want fixed. All right. Hey, I'm not trying to lock myself into anything. I'm just throwing it out there. And the reason we don't have a signature on this occurred to me this past year when we had a tricky situation where buyers had a bunch of stuff they wanted fixed, but they wanted to take some of the legwork off the part of the seller and send out additional contractors. So they extended in writing in the body of a change in terms addendum to allow extra time for an inspection to occur. Buyer and seller signed that extension where it was written here, seller to allow 3 extra days for foundation inspection. The seller at that point said, we're done. Buyer said, no, we didn't get our inspector out there yet. And according to the legal hotline, when I called them, they said, yeah, actually, that's pretty much the end of it because you entered into an agreement during your negotiation period. So my one big red flag for each of you is if you're going to be extending a time frame with regards to a home inspection, make sure you use paragraph 6 down here where it specifically names the time period in paragraph whatever, line whatever of the agreement of sale. Because if you extend that time period, then the subsequent time periods are extended as well, as opposed to just allowing 3 extra days. And the seller said, oh no, I thought that was my my penance. I thought that was the repair, that I was gonna let you come in here and do your inspection. And the buyer was kind of slack jawed at that point saying, oh, that's not what I meant. But that's the way it read, according to PAR. All right. So be careful with those things. Words matter.
That's the question.
Absolutely.
What is your preference on submitting the buyer's reply to inspection with inspections? Do you do one fell swoop? Or do you submit them as they come?
You may, the question at home, if you couldn't hear on the mic, was, should we be submitting a reply to inspection for each of these inspections as they come in, or wait to get them all and send them over in a chunk?
Like if you get your home, you get your wood inspection.
But you have a VA water and it takes 14 days to come back.
Right, so do you submit what you have, knowing damn well that you're probably waiting another 10 days for your septic and radar?
It doesn't matter to me as long as you check the appropriate box and no additional in your reply. So you can send,
We get a lot of kickback for that. They're like, no, we want one. I'm like, it doesn't matter. We're still within our contingency period.
and it's up to the seller whether or not they negotiate those wholesale all at once, or if they do them chunk by chunk.
To me, I feel like it would be a good thing for them to have it up front, is what we're looking at.
And they, you know, you can send all that information over at once and they can sit on it. They don't have any obligation to, the seller doesn't have any obligation to negotiate those bit by bit by bit. They just know what's coming bit by bit by bit. And, you know, they can wait until they have everything. They don't have to negotiate all of that until day 5 of their time period. Everybody following the logic? Cool. All right. One thing that is required.
I did have a quick question about the reply to inspections.
Yeah, great.
So I always do it, and send it to seller agents that were accepting the property because I just figured it's something that you should do. But I'm in a situation now where they did a pest inspection. We got no reply, whether it was good, bad. It just went past the deadline, which that's great because now my seller doesn't have to pay for anything to do with the pest inspection. I wasn't going to call and remind them that, hey, you need to send me a reply. Do you have to send a reply if everything's good?
The seller or the buyer?
No, the buyer.
No, technically you don't.
Okay.
But
I always do, but I wasn't going to remind another agent.
I think it's good because, especially as a buyer's agent, because by having your buyer sign off that they have accepted this, who's that protecting?
It's protecting them.
And protecting you, the
me.
buyer's agent, right?
Yeah.
So I hate to be a jaded kind of person, but you know, we always have to kind of be on the defensive.
Mhm.
You know, practice defensive driving, my mom always said. Well, I try to practice defensive real estate and close the loopholes. That's why we require a pre-settlement walkthrough report. You know, just to kind of shut the door, you know, close the book on the whole thing, put a nice bow on it. And that's what this buyer's reply to inspection does. If the buyer signs it, accepting the property, then you have verifiable documentation that they're good to go. Right? They saw the
Yeah.
reports and they said, yep, looks good. And there's no way for them to come back and say, but wait. Because everybody means what they say when they say it, until they get down the street and they're talking to their hairdresser or their cousin and they bring up some kind of, oh, whenever I bought a house, this happened. And now they get in their head. Maybe they get cold feet or buyer's remorse. And this backs you up that you have it in writing that they were okay with what happened. If you're on
Yeah,
the
because
seller-
I've always done it for my buyers. I was just really shocked this time. This is the first time that I haven't had a buyer's agent send me one. Because I'm on the selling end and
Yep.
I was like, am I supposed to ask for that paper? And I was
No.
like, well, I'm not gonna remind them of their deadline.
Um,
I don't want to pay for a pest fumigation if it's needed, if they miss their deadline. I'm sorry, I just,
Nope.
protecting my seller.
yep, I get it. You know, and talk it over with your seller. Do you want me to reach out on this? Sometimes it's easier just to ask, rather than, you never know where it's gonna go. I mean, if they missed a deadline,
But what if they do miss the deadline and then they want to resubmit it?
yeah, I've seen it.
I mean,
You can tell them, hey, you missed the deadline and we don't have any obligation to negotiate with you. But in good faith,
you try to work.
you can ask nice.
Well, it's like about 10 days past their deadline.
If it's 10 days past the deadline, good luck to them.
We're going to settlement.
So,
I always.
so this is required by federal law on all FHA deals. For your protection, get a home inspection. Now, we have a 4-part form. It's part of Justin's Paperwork Reduction Act, which has the deposit money notice, home warranty, home protection, and home inspection all on one form. If you want to double ensure that everybody understands what's going on, for your protection, get a home inspection. This is the one that needs to be done for FHA deals. Okay? And you check the box under the FHA financing saying that you provided it to your client. There's nothing that says you can't use this on a conventional or cash deal too. If you want to protect yourself, that FHA, for your protection, get a home inspection. That's the FYP CYA form. So what happens if a deal falls through, y'all? We've got a home inspection in our hot little hands because we're the seller. They brought us this elegant 40-page hit job on our house. What do we do with it? Do we have to share that property disclosure with everybody?
As a seller,
Yes.
like as in everybody as.
So you're putting it back active on market,
Yeah. What's everybody's thoughts?
I thought they had to.
you have to disclose
Share.
any known material hazardous defects.
Bingo, you said it. Magic words. We have to disclose known material defects. Is the home inspection, is the home inspector, Mr. Billy Bob sees things, is his opinion that the roof, while not leaking, is nearing the end of its useful life? Is that a material defect?
No.
Correct. That's an opinion, a judgment call. Is,
You do the addendum to your property disclosure.
Right.
Based on material hazardous defects.
so there's a several different ways you can go with this, guys. I'd like to over disclose if everything's accurate. If that seller's property disclose, or if that's a home inspection is full of stuff that is just bad judgment. I mean, we're going to go over this case by case, but if it's full of accurate information, then it doesn't hurt you to disclose that. It can even be a value add for you if you go through and say, this has been fixed, this has been fixed, this has been fixed, this has been fixed. I've done that in the past where we had the same home inspector come back and issue an addendum to that home inspection report stating that these items had been addressed. And you can do that. So the items that you must disclose are those material defects. Age is not a defect. Otherwise,
Thank you.
yes. I'd be screwed. But, so age is not a defect. However, material defects must be disclosed. Whether you add that seller's property disclosure as an addendum to your seller's property disclosure, or just use the actual addendum and add those items to it, doesn't matter to me. Do whatever your seller is comfortable with. Just make sure you disclose those items. So, how do we protect ourselves when it comes to home inspections, seller's property disclosures, etc.? There's a whole line of liability limiting products out there. We've got Seller Shield, we've got home warranties, we've got the for your protection, get a home inspection, the FYPCYA. You can use that. Make sure that people sign these things, and if somebody's going in as is without home inspections, we can have them sign additional documentation to that effect as well. Whenever it comes to your reply to inspections, or even your home when you're writing your initial offer, don't get cute, right? Don't try and have your cake and eat it too. Don't try and say things like, this is for buyers' informational purposes only. If we're doing that, we have to be clear. Is the deal contingent upon that inspection or not? So make sure that the words you're using in your agreement read the way that you want them to read. Because I may say something that comes out wrong. Ask my wife. But whenever we're putting it in a real estate contract, make sure that it's, legally correct. And if at all possible, budget extra time. You can have an attorney write that clause. So that's my general talk on property disclosures and home inspections. I'll give it up to a vote. Everybody has received all of this documentation. If you want a line-by-line review of the seller's property disclosure, we can spend next month doing that. It's your call. But I think that the guidelines for preparation and use are thorough enough that you can bore yourself. I won't do it for you. But if you want further investigation on what these things mean, please let me know and we can budget some time to have a course on that. Any questions before we wrap up here? Everybody good? All right. Well, if you have any more questions or if you want me to do a deeper dive on any of this information, please let me know. Shoot me a text, email, give me a call. I appreciate you all. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy day to come and learn how to protect yourself and your clients.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
See y'all.